My name is Yer. I work as a nurse. Um, I am a mother of three. Um, my ethnic background is I'm Hmong. So Hmong people are a minority group that were in Southeast Asia and Laos and Thailand specifically. We came over during the Vietnam War when there was war in Laos as well. Um, that was actually coded the Secret War. We're a very small group. I don't know if you have any Hmong people in your area, but we're kind of in small groups, kind of scattered all over the world after the war. So my family landed in Nebraska after the war. And then they moved to Wisconsin, and then that's where I was born and where I was raised, and where I still am. With regards to spirituality and healing and everything like that, um, I've always I've always been able to feel and sense spirits and other things around me. I used to see them when I was little. I was able to like communicate with them at a very young age. Um, that kind of was stunted because adults always tell you that it's your imagination, right? So that was stunted for me for a very long time. So then through COVID, I went through a very intense healing process being a nurse and having to work with people with COVID and having to deal with that. Um, so through my healing journey, my spiritual, became more in touch with my spiritual side. I was raised very religious. I grew up in a very religious household. My parents, when they came here, they really wanted to assimilate into the American culture. So then they dropped their Hmong people usually follow shamanism beliefs. Um, and so when they came to America, they kind of dropped their shaman beliefs, and they began going to church. So I was pretty rebellious against religion for a very long time. But through finding myself in spirituality, I, because I always kind of clumped the two together, and I feel like a lot of people do. So, in discovering who I truly am inside, I was able to really um, discover that everything kind of has its place, and religion has its place as well. And it's just, I feel that it's just human that really kind of turned these teachings into something that it wasn't supposed to be. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So I suppose as a nurse, you're obviously quite highly medically trained
I am.
in health and physiology and things like that. So I'd imagine you must have been educated in a system that doesn't believe there's anything more to us and that everything is kind of explained physically with brain physiology and psychology. What kind of atmosphere did you find in the nursing community, and how did that affect your beliefs?
Um, well, when I first started as a nurse, I actually started working um, in neurology. I worked in a neurology clinic. Um, so in working in the neurology clinic, I was able to really become a very I was able to become very educated in the brain and in the nervous system and the central nervous system and everything like that, and in conditions associated with that, and then also with pain and how we process pain and how the body processes pain and how the brain processes it, right? Because it's all it's all from the brain. It's all how we interpret it and everything like that, because it all goes back to the brain. So all the signals go back to the brain. Um, so that was really my first job in nursing. And then as I began to progress in my career, I've worked various jobs. Right now, I'm currently working in a long-term care facility or a nursing home. I've I've worked with many different types of people. So the doctors that I worked under, it was very concrete. It was very, this is what happens when you die. These are
Mm.
things that lead up to death. These are like because it was all, a lot of medical things are evidence based. So it was all about the progression of a disease and about treating the symptoms. Um, a lot of these conditions that were being treated, a lot of them have are very hard to cure, because, and I have my own beliefs and thoughts on that. I believe that everything really stems from trauma and about how we carry it within our bodies. Um, but then when it comes to death, I feel that I'm very different from other nurses, where I have a very strong appreciation for death because I have taken care of people who were literally on their deathbeds. I have seen the progression of people who have these very chronic and critical illnesses, and I've seen them kind of just wither away in their physical bodies. But you can you can tell and you can see when you look in their eyes, and you can feel that they are still there, that their soul essence is still there. Um, so I had this very profound experience. It was during COVID, where I was taking care of a gentleman, and I'm I usually don't advocate for medication just because I feel like medication often blocks us. However, in the end of life, I feel that it really um, assists in making people very comfortable so that they can pass, because at times death can appear very painful when you are looking at it from an outsider's perspective. Um, so I had this situation where I was taking care of a gentleman, and I was working a double shift. So I was working a 16-hour day, and I was taking care of him from the very beginning of my day until the end of my day. Um, I began administering the morphine so that I could help make him comfortable. Um, and About halfway through my day, I walked into his room, and when I was administering the morphine, I could feel I I saw other people walk in with me. Um, and then when I went to look up to ask whoever it was that walked in a question, because I literally thought someone walked in, there was nobody there. But the room, you can feel energy. The room felt it felt full. It didn't feel heavy. It just felt full. It felt like there was energy there waiting for this gentleman to pass. Right. And it was, looking back on it now, like at that moment, because I wasn't where I am now and I don't have the understanding that I do now, it was kind of frightening for a moment, just because it was like, whoa, what was that? Because it was the first time I really experienced something that intense. Um, I continued to take care of him, and I continued to feel all of this energy in the room every single time that I walked in. I believe that it was partly his energy, and then I do believe that it was the energy of like his wife, parents, and children that had passed before him. Um, Towards the end of the day, right before I left, I went in to administer the last dose of morphine. And right then, I was holding his hand, and he took his last breath. In that moment, there was a lot of heavy feelings that came up for me, just because that was really one of the first times that I've ever had someone literally pass away while I was holding them. Right, it was a new experience for me. However, as I began to feel into it more and think about it more over the next like couple of weeks to a month, I realized how I realized how honoring of an experience it was, just because I was able to be there with him when he passed. And I don't feel that I don't feel that that death is the last thing that we go through. You know, I feel that death is a rebirth. I feel that we are leaving this physical realm and then we are going into the spiritual world again, because there's so much out there that we cannot see physically. And there's so much out there that that we consciously don't know of, right? Because there's just so much more out there than what we can feel, see, sense, and know with our physical senses.
There's so many, beliefs surrounding what happens after death, and unfortunately, it's one of those things that we can't ever really know fully while we're alive.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose, how do your beliefs that we do continue? How does that pair with your education, your training in as a nurse?
So it can be a little challenging at times, just because I know that my beliefs are different than others. So it can be a little bit challenging. So mostly, if I feel that if I feel that others are open to hear it, I will speak on it. Especially with like family, which may not always be the correct time to speak of it, or with my coworkers and everything like that. I really do try to provide as much of the knowledge that I have. I try to share that with others. Really, I feel that one of my biggest roles when the transition is happening from life to death, one of my biggest roles is to be of support, especially for family and for people who have lost a loved one. And then it also can be kind of challenging at times, just because when people speak of their passed on loved ones, like my friends or colleagues or anything like that, sometimes I can feel them, and then I just have this kind of knowing of how things happened, how things progressed. Sometimes I can see them, sometimes I can communicate with them, and then I really try to use my discernment to see whether or not this is something that's appropriate to speak of with the person who I'm speaking with, or who brought it up.
Mm-hmm. So how can you differentiate between communications like that as being genuine communications versus just, say, a random occurrence in your imagination or in your mind?
The way that I can tell is how it feels right here in my heart. That's the way that I can tell. And then also, there are times when I will ask questions. There are times when people will bring up like that they lost their father or something, and then I will physically feel sensations in my own body, where it gets hard to breathe, or where I have a sudden pain in my chest, or where I see an accident or something. And then I will very gently and kindly bring up what I'm feeling, what I'm seeing. And then I will gently ask, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions about this? Just to kind of confirm for me, I guess, that what I'm feeling, sensing, and knowing is true. When I can tell when it's imagination, when it's all thought, and when there's no feeling associated with it. Because most of the time when I'm able to connect with people who have with the energy that is no longer in the physical, when I'm able to connect with that, I can also feel a great sense of love within my heart and a great sense of emotion within me that is not mine. And I'm a very strong empath, so I can feel the energies of the people around me. So then when I am communicating with someone who has passed, I can tell because I can feel this immense amount of love that the person had for the other individual.
Mm. You mentioned earlier that you kind of share the knowledge that you have with those who are more open to it. There is, of course, a distinct difference between belief and knowledge when it comes to this sort of thing. So, what examples of knowledge do you have that you would share with those who are open, and how would you differentiate that between knowledge and belief?
I have to think about that one a little bit. That's a really good question. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I feel like a lot of it has to do with with the feeling that I get from it, and then with when I speak on my own knowledge or wisdoms or my own knowing about it, it really comes down to like have what I have seen within my own mind's eye, and then what I can share and what I have confirmed in the past, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are certain things where I had I feel like belief is more I feel like belief is really tied into a desire for wanting it to be true, right? Whereas knowledge is more of it's been confirmed for me, so then I feel that it's my truth, I guess. If that
So I
makes sense.
suppose, yeah. So I suppose to kind of take it at a different angle, what kind of views do you hold that you would consider knowledge as opposed to belief in terms of these metaphysical realities?
So I in terms of I know that this world is not it. I know that when we transition out of this life, I know that when we transition, that our bodies are done, right? Our bodies are done because our souls are no longer within it. But I do know that there's more to it. I know that we are all energy, and by that, it's because our bodies, even though we are no longer in it, our bodies still contain energy. So really, in truth, our bodies begin to decay, right? And then I strongly feel that we're not supposed to be in coffins. I feel that we are supposed to go back into the world, into the earth, and we are supposed to nurture the earth and the ground, right? Now I'm starting to wonder if knowledge and belief to me are the same, and the words are just interchangeable for me.
I suppose.
Sorry, I'm a little nervous right now.
That's fine. No, it's not a problem. So I suppose when I think of belief versus knowledge, I would say that knowledge is kind of on the realms of I know that if I jump out of a window, I'm going to fall to the ground because that's that's true, and we that I'm fairly certain as I can be that that's true. Whereas a belief would be something like when we die we continue onward, because I don't know that with such confidence that if I jump out of a window I'm going to fall to the ground because of gravity. That's kind of what I would consider the difference between. So the knowledge that you have, for example, that this life isn't all we have and that we do continue, would you say that's a knowledge by that definition to you?
I would say that is knowledge. I would say just because I have been able to witness my own past lives. I have been able to see things, and I do I don't feel that that's so much of a belief as it is,
Knowing.
yes, a knowing, a deep knowing of just knowing that there's so much more in this world that we physically can't see or know yet. There's
So,
just so much beyond it.
yeah. So have you not found that that knowledge has been kind of put into doubt as you've gone through your education with, I'd imagine, those who have said with such confidence that there is nothing more, everything is explained in terms of consciousness coming from the brain and everything else. Do you find that that kind of information, that argument has had any effect on your beliefs at all? And how would you respond to something like that?
So I mean, I was one of those people for a very long time. I was one of those people for a very long time. I grew up believing in, I grew up kind of forming my own thoughts and beliefs on the world, and I really strongly believed in reincarnation. And then when I became a nurse, when I went through the education to become a nurse, and when I was working as a nurse for the first few years, I really did believe that when we die, our bodies just decay, and that's the end of it. I really did believe that for a very long time. But it was really through this huge transformation that I went through, and through working with COVID, that there's just more. I just really don't know how to explain it. It's just a knowing. It's just um I just don't feel that this is our I just don't feel that this is our first time around in this world.
Mhm.
A lot of us have been here multiple times, so
Hmm. So I suppose you, in a way, must be similar to me in your line of work, that you like, evidence to understand things, because of course nursing is very deeply ingrained in a scientific method. So have you had any experiences other than, you mentioned the mediumship and or I suppose your own mediumship, where you can feel and ask questions to those who have lost loved ones? Have you had any experiences that I suppose have been what we call veridical, where something has been confirmed, um, the information that you've received from any particular experiences? So, for instance,
um
if someone in a near-death experience was, say, able to go into a room a long way away from where they were and see a number, and then come back and tell that number and have it be correct, that kind of, that's what I mean when I say verification.
um so there have been times when, in like deep meditation, when I've been able to connect with some people call them aliens. I call them galactic ancestors. Some people call them extraterrestrials. Where I have been able to connect with them, and at first it was one of those where I'm such a logical thinker, where I was, is this truth or is this not? Is this imagination? Like, am I actually communicating with? Because it sounds wild, right? To someone who hasn't done it before. So it sounds wild. There have been times when I was in meditation, and I saw this figure where I could definitely tell it was galactic ancestor, and very kind of like a human skull, and very tight, almost gray skin. And I wasn't sure if it was something that was real or not. When I came out of meditation, I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. And I spoke with a couple of friends about it, and I was just like, I just don't know if this is truth or not. My friend encouraged me to ask good questions and to ask them questions. Um, so then the next, I feel like it was like a week later, was in meditation again, and the same beings came through. Um, I began communicating with the beings, telepathically, because they don't use words. I began communicating with the beings, and I asked, "Where are you from?" And when I asked, "Where are you from?" the immediate response that I received was Pisces 3. Um, and then even in meditation, my logical mind began to take over, and it was, are you sure you don't mean Pleiades? Are you sure you don't mean this? And then very clearly, Pisces 3. Um, in meditation, they showed me like almost diagrams of prisms and pyramids and everything like that. Beautiful diagrams to show me source consciousness and how it shines through a pyramid. Um, After meditation, I came out of meditation. Afterwards, I Googled Pisces 3. And I do study astrology, but I don't know very much about the Pisces constellation itself. The Pisces constellation actually has 3 planets within the constellation that are known to astronomers and astrologists. And I did not know that information prior to Googling it that day. And then there's also this one time when I was deep in meditation and these beings came through again, and I'm still trying to process this message because I haven't been able to fully yet. But the message that they gave to me was the answers are in the 7 rings of Saturn. Prior to that, I didn't know that Saturn actually had 7 rings. When I came out, I Googled how many rings does Saturn have, and it was 7. It's little things like that where it just really confirms for me that certain feelings that I feel within my own body are the feelings that kind of confirm for me that the messages that are coming through are actual messages and not just from the mind and imagination.
Mm-hmm. So what is your process of meditation when you sit to meditate?
When I meditate, I usually pick a couple of crystals that I have a table full of crystals, and I usually will pick out the ones that I feel called to pick out. I don't have a specific number of them that I pick out. I just normally pick out as many as I feel called to. Sometimes I will hold them in my hand. Sometimes I will lay them around my body. I create safe space, sometimes by lighting sage, incense, or Palo Santo. Sometimes I lie down to meditate. Sometimes I sit up. It really depends on how I'm feeling at that time. I ask my spirit guides and I ask spirit to protect me, to guide me, and I ask them to protect me and to guide me through this process. My physical body, my energetic body, my astral body. And sometimes I play music. Sometimes I just listen to the vehicles that are passing on the road in front of my house. And then I just kind of clear my mind. I follow my breath, and I focus on my breathing, because sometimes this mind does not want to stop thinking. So I really have to try to quiet it down with focusing on my breathing and focusing on my breathing and counting my breaths.
Mm-hmm. So when you say that you ask your guides to protect you, is this just kind of your thinking, please protect me, or do you say verbally? Or do
Both.
you just kind of feel?
Yeah, both. Sometimes I can think it. Sometimes if I feel that I need sometimes I feel that if I need a little bit extra, then I will say it out loud. Sometimes I do feel that saying it out loud helps a little bit better, because you are actually physically putting that intention out into the world. Whereas sometimes when I feel that we just think it or feel it in our minds, that we sometimes I feel that it feels different when you say it versus when you think it, just like when you say affirmations or something.
Yeah, it just kind of adds a reinforcement to it, I suppose, physically.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I think things like crystals and burning certain herbs, you'd say herbs, that kind of thing is something that I've always been especially skeptical of. Not necessarily because I think it's bunk, but because I more than acknowledge that I just don't understand the science behind how crystals work. But from my point of view, the way I would see it through it is ignorance. I would see just that they're stones, and I don't really understand how that can interact with a non-physical energy, and how burning certain herbs can clear energy when that itself is physical. So how would you describe that crystals and stones and herbs and things like that actually work spiritually?
So yeah, I used to feel the same, actually. I used to feel the same, where I was like, those are just rocks.
Mm.
um and it wasn't until I didn't start truly believing in them until I had a coworker one day, and we I had crystals. I had crystals at my house, and he had crystals at his, and we would exchange them, and we would hold each other's crystals, and we would tell each other what we felt from them, and it was often the same thing. So everything is made up of energy. Even if it doesn't move, even if it's a solid thing, just that the energy in it is moving at a rate that we can't see. Just like very much like how everything is, made up of atoms and molecules and everything like that. We just can't see it on a deep level. But I know that crystals, I believe that crystals are real and that they hold energy, because I can feel the different types of energy when I hold different crystals. I can feel where in my body, where in my chakra system the crystal is working and what it's affecting. With burning like sage or Palo Santo, I really do feel that it's about the intention of it. I really do feel that intention has a lot to do with it when clearing space and when creating sacred space. I believe that intention has a lot to do with it, and the thoughts that you have behind it and the emotions that you put behind it.
So I suppose how do those thoughts and intentions interact with the herbs and things like that? Because again, my mind would go to, well, herbs we know are physical things, and when you burn them, the smoke and the odours they produce are physical, and yet thoughts are not. So how can they interact?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because it would be similar to saying, how in that case, why can't I, imagine a cloud turning into a specific shape and then having that happen, because my intention is reacting with that physical substance. If you see what I mean, that's just where my mind would go.
Everything comes back to the feeling within, the feeling within, and the emotions that you feel within. I feel that everything, the feeling that how you feel, your mindset prior to burning it, and then how you feel afterwards, how sometimes, honestly, I feel so much better after I've cleansed myself. I feel so much better. I feel almost, and if I ask for protection when cleansing myself, I do sometimes feel like I'm in a bubble, and I feel like it's difficult for other people's energy or other people's thoughts to come into my bubble. I feel that everything really comes back to the feeling that you have within your own body, within your own heart space, and within the emotions that it evokes, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So my mind immediately, and I'm not saying I doubt what you're saying is true, but this is just how my mind works. It goes straight to suggestion and placebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
What would you think to that?
You know, it may just be that.
Hmm.
It may
But I
just be
mean,
that.
even so, that's a pretty phenomenal effect, isn't it? How the mind can have such an effect over the way we feel.
Right, right. And
Mm.
and honestly, like it may just be that. I've had those thoughts before as well, where it's like, is this really working? And regardless of if it is placebo effect or whether it's something that is real, it's what matters is not whether or not it's placebo effect or whether it's real or whether it actually works. What matters is the way that you feel afterwards and the
Mm.
feeling that you have afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of times placebo effect is used as a counter argument to some of these things, but to me, even the suggestion of the placebo effect and how it works. So if you're ill and one set of a sample receives a drug, the other sample receives a placebo,
Mm-hmm.
and still the placebo group get better,
Mm-hmm.
or improve. Now, to me, that is suggesting that intention and belief does have a physical effect on our body, which to me would suggest that suggestion and belief and intention does interact with physical matter on some level. So again, we're coming back to that. Clearly, intention does have an effect, which would
Right.
suggest that there are more spiritual things to nature than we would imagine. And I think it's that kind of interpretation is often overlooked by the scientific community, who say, yeah, well, that's just the placebo effect. But then, what does that, thinking about what that implies is pretty amazing.
Definitely, yeah. Mindset. Our minds are so powerful, and we've only tapped into so much of our brains, right? And our minds are so powerful. Our minds, what we say to ourselves, if somebody takes a placebo and they think that they're actually taking a real drug, they're saying that they're going to get better because they are taking the real drug. So they are. It's it's almost like when we say affirmations, right? Because we are when we say affirmations, we are saying like, I am worthy, and then we are just continuously saying it until we feel worthy, because we are bringing that energy to us. So the placebo effect in our minds, just the way that everything works, and just the way that our minds work, mindset has a great deal to do with spirituality, just because. And even if some people argue that mindset and our mind is ego, but our ego is a very powerful thing because our ego has protected us for so long. Um, but mindset, when we're able to change our mind, we're really able to really change our perception of the world. So the placebo effect, is all about mindset, and it's all about beliefs and intentions. And although it may not be the actual physical like drug that like is being given to someone who's ill, right? It may not be that actual drug to treat that condition. I mean, that should say in itself enough about like how powerful the mind is.
Indeed, yeah. And I find it
Yeah.
fascinating how it's the same people who will use the placebo effect as an argument against spirituality, but these are the same people that then say that the mind can't have any effect over matter. And you think, well, those are two very contradictory arguments.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Um. So, what would you say? Or no, a better question maybe, or at least a more relevant one. When you've been by the bedside of those who have died, I imagine probably quite a few at this point in your career. Have you ever had any experiences of the so-called phenomenon terminal lucidity? Are you aware of terminal lucidity?
Are you referring to like when they come back for a moment, or and they're completely?
Yeah. Generally, it's often kind of associated with dementia or Alzheimer's or other brain degenerative, whatever the word is, diseases, degenerative diseases, where the brains, of course, the synapses between the nerves are severing, and the nerves themselves are severing beyond repair, and yet often, sometimes months, sometimes weeks, sometimes hours and minutes before actually passing, they seem to regain a substantial amount of lucidity and awareness, and they know people around them where they shouldn't physically be able to do that, because in brain degenerative diseases, the brain is literally breaking apart. And so that is a very it's been attempted to be explained, but to me all the explanations kind of pale in comparison to the actual phenomena. So have you ever had any experiences of those, or what do you think to that kind of experience?
I haven't experienced that too much while people are like actively passing. I have experienced it. I have had patients who have had moments of lucidity, like within the progression of their dementia and Alzheimer's. More towards the end of life, I see a lot of gazing off into, like, looking at something, and like the person will be like staring right through me, behind me, because I feel that they can see something. Or I often see people grabbing a lot, like they are grabbing at things. People who are very motionless for much of their time in their bed upon the days prior to becoming active. So then I do see grabbing out a lot, where people will be grabbing things.
Or like reaching out to someone they can see, sort of
I
thing.
have, yes, and I have had moments where people will be talking to passed on loved ones, as if they're in the room with them, waiting for them. Sometimes, if the patients can speak, because oftentimes they can't right before they pass, but if they can speak, a lot of them do talk about like lights on the ceiling, or lights in their room that they can see, and oftentimes they are reaching out and grabbing for those lights, trying to get them, because they can see them and they know that they're real.
And they know that they should strive to get to them.
Yeah.
So what would you say to the argument that I've heard a lot, and I'm playing devil's advocate here just to get your opinions on it, for those that say, well, why should we take the word of those whose brains are in a very bad state, who are likely on drugs? Why should we take what they say as reality? Shouldn't we say that that's a good evidence that it's far from reality because their brain is in such a state? Why should we take that as true?
I mean, I would say, why not? Why not? What's the harm in believing them? I mean,
to which they would say, because it's not true.
It's not true. It's not true to the person asking the question, but it is the truth of the person who is passing away.
And if it offers them comfort at the time of their death, whether it's true or not, so be it. And I'm pretty convinced that what they're seeing is genuine. But as I say, I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Because we know, especially from things like, not naming specifics, things like hallucinogenic drugs, we know that they seem to limit brain activity. They seem to lower brain activity to a level that we wouldn't expect. That's not what I'm trying to say, but effectively, they lower the brain activity, so which would suggest that they allow more of reality to come in, less filtration from the brain, less less interference, I suppose, from the brain. So that then begs the question: well, are these people that are, especially that are dying as their brain is turning off, or those who have brain degenerative diseases, are they actually seeing more real of reality because their brain isn't able to limit what's coming in to them, what is perceived by them? I mean, there's a lot of questions around how this works, but I say the studies with the hallucinogenic drugs does beg the question that maybe as people are dying and their brain is shutting down, more of reality is able to be perceived and less is shielded by the brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And especially because we only use so much of our brain. So we only use so much of our brain. So how do we not know that the people who have these degenerative diseases aren't accessing other parts of their brain that we normally don't use?
Hmm.
I mean,
Or even perhaps that certain parts of their brains that are dying off are those that limit the other parts of the brain from function. And so
yes,
as they degrade, the activity on the other parts of the brain, which maybe are some kind of spiritual link, physical spiritual link, are becoming more active or less, or at least less restricted. Perhaps. I
yeah,
mean, it's all conjecture. But then, to me, those that argue that the brain is the source of consciousness
mhm,
will say there's absolutely no evidence that consciousness exists outside of the brain and is received by it. To which I would say, well, what's the evidence that the brain creates it then outside of correlation? Because correlation, I could argue both ways,
mhm,
you know, but one is often chosen above the other with the same lack of evidence for either.
mhm.
But
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's just a shame that people don't acknowledge how little we actually know and use that as a pathway to discover more by talking to people such as yourself and Jeremy, who I spoke with yesterday, and others who have had these experiences, um, and be much more open to them
right.
without that belief that we already know it's nonsense, because we don't at all.
Yeah, and to add to that, I do feel that the brain, the mind, the ego really blocks us, right? And then so when these things happen, and when these people who are actively passing, who are able to see these things, they're no longer blocked by because of the diseases that they have, that they've acquired, right, in their life. So they're no longer blocked, and then they're able to access different things than we normally would, because they aren't blocked, they don't have that barrier anymore, and they can. So then what they are seeing, what they are feeling, what they know to be real to them and to be their truth, even if they seem demented to us, and I say that in quotes because I don't like using that word, but I know that a lot of people use that word. um, it's their truth. And how do we how do we know that we're just not all blocked and that
Mm.
we just don't have this barrier up, saying that we have all been taught and have been programmed to believe that these are our truths?
Mm.
When we lose that block, perhaps there's more truth out there that we just don't know of yet,
Mm.
you know?
And it would even make sense, evolutionarily, that our brains have evolved to a state to suppress that information, because I imagine living as an individual in a physical world would be a lot more difficult if we had access to all of our past life memories. And never mind that it would completely ruin the purpose of us being here to learn, which I believe is the purpose. Because we'd
Mhm.
already know everything, it'd be completely pointless for us to be here in the first place. So we need some kind of limiting mechanism so that we can effectively start again each time and learn new lessons and bring them to our ultimate whatever we are after we die.
Mhm.
But again, this is kind of venturing into conjecture and philosophies of metaphysics. We don't have a clue, to be honest with you, but it would make sense to me to think that way.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree as well.